evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us here this evening. I'm Cynthia Knight, and I am the director here of the Barron Art Center. And on behalf of myself and my staff, Brandon Powell, our program coordinator, and Connie Widmer, my administrative assistant, I would like to welcome all of you to our Taste of the Art program. Tonight we are discussing the Hermitage. The program tonight is presented by Marianne Zalotta. Ms. Zalotta received her BA in Art History from Drew University and her MA from Rutgers University. With 20 years on lecturing experience, Ms. Zalotta has lectured in various venues, including the Sorbonne, Christel, and Regent cruise ships. Since 2009, Ms. Zalotta has lectured at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Rutgers University. We've been very pleased to present Marianne with our whole series on the various museums, and it has been very, very successful. And if within the audience at any time, if any of you have any ideas of something that you may like to have us cover, maybe something that we overlooked, please just give us a call, speak to either myself or Brandon, and we will be more than happy to entertain your suggestions. So without any further hesitation, I will surrender the microphone right now to Marianne, and please do me a favor and turn your cell phones off at this time so we don't have any interruptions, and enjoy the program. Thank you.
This evening we're going to discuss the Hermitage, and interestingly enough, the history of the Hermitage is just as interesting as the paintings which are hanging in the Hermitage. So I'm going to give a little bit of time to the actual building itself and its construction and the history of the building. Now, it starts with Peter the Great. He was the Tsar of Russia, 6 feet 7 inches tall, with an insatiable thirst for knowledge and a wish to bring Russia into the 18th century. He mastered certain trades such as shipbuilding, which he learned in Holland, carpentry, and even shoemaking. He wanted to learn everything from the West. He even practiced, believe it or not, dentistry and surgery as well. Okay. He was a true autocrat. He had a very mean streak in him, okay? But he also desired the bottom one. Okay. You want me to hold this? You don't have to hold it. Okay. He desired to have a port on the sea so that he could do some trading with the West. And so he made a very reckless decision. He decided to take a place on the Baltic Sea where there were a few fishing villages and build himself a great city. Geographically and climatologically, it was a bad idea. But he lured a lot of foreign architects and artisans to Russia to complete this huge project. Now realize, he had to bring all these foreigners in because the Russians simply couldn't do it themselves. They were basically back in a medieval society. They had no skills whatsoever. But thousands of laborers were forced to work filling in the swamps, because at that time, that area of Russia was a huge swamp, and you had to fill it in before you put any buildings on it. So they were called in, thousands of laborers were called in and worked in rain, snow, and in the summer when there were thousands of mosquitoes because it was a swamp. Thousands of people died, including the French architect Jean-Baptiste Leblond, who died after being beaten by Peter. Peter the Great never took no for an answer. Okay, all right. Now, after Peter died, oops, wait a minute, I wanted to give you a little bit here of this. There is a portrait of Peter, and as you can see behind him, there were some sailing ships, because again, he worked as a shipwright. He was fully knowledgeable in how to build a ship. Here is another portrait of him. And here is his daughter. Here is the statue done by Falconet that Catherine the Great commissioned, and it's called the Statue of Peter the Great. Now, the sculpture was commissioned by Catherine the Great, and she called a French sculptor to come to do this. Now, the sculptor, whose name was Falconet, could not sculpt the head correctly, but he had a 20-year-old assistant named Marianne Collot, and he gave her the commission to sculpt the head of Peter the Great. And so the statue itself is by Falconet, but the head is by Marianne Collot. And Marianne, now mind you, this statue had a lot of problems with it because the mold broke, and it's a bronze statue. The mold broke. They set fire to the workshop because the hot bronze. Also, they had a problem with balancing it because it's only on two legs. Okay, so they had a problem with that. Additionally, it sits on a monolithic rock that was brought from Finland. The rock is 42 feet long and 34 feet high. It was found in Finland, floated to St. Petersburg, and the statue was finally finished and unveiled in 1782. It took 16 years to complete the statue. Now, there is on the bottom a dedication simply to Peter I from Catherine II. Now, interestingly enough, during World War II, when the Nazis, as you well know, laid siege for 900 days to St. Petersburg, the Nazi air and artillery bombing never touched the statue. Interesting. All right. Now, here is Peter's daughter, Elizabeth Petrovna. She was the youngest daughter of Peter and his live-in lady at the time, and she was given a very sketchy education because Peter thought he was going to marry her to Louis XV. Well, that didn't happen. But she was a very brilliant woman as far as languages. She spoke French, German, Italian, Swedish, and Russian. By 1740, Russia was ruled by a regent. Her name was Anna, and she was the regent for her infant son, Ivan VI. She threatened to send Elizabeth to a convent. On December 6, 1741, at midnight, Elizabeth, along with all her faithful retainers and the Preobrazhensky Guard, arrested all the ministers of the government. From there, they went to the Winter Palace, arrested the regent and the baby. Why they arrested a baby, I don't know. All right, but it was all over by 8 o'clock in the morning, and she was now the Empress of Russia. So at 33, with no training whatsoever, there she was having to run a government, but she had inherited her father's genius for government and good judgment, all right? She founded the University of Moscow and also the State Theater, and she outlawed the death penalty. She chose her ministers very wisely, and she decided that she was going to build a new winter palace. So she got an Italian architect named Rastrelli, who was commissioned to begin building a new winter palace, which was to become the Hermitage under Catherine the Great. The building began in 1754, and it was not completely completed until 1817. Rastrelli worked 20 years on the building, and by the time he was, after the 20 years, the treasury was completely depleted. There was no more money. The cost at that time was 2.5 million rubles, which was equal to the value of 45 tons of silver. Elizabeth died in 1762 before it was finished. She never actually lived in it, but at least she had a place to house her 15,000 dresses. Now, if she wore 2 dresses a day, it would take her, I figured this out mathematically, it would take her 20 years to wear all of them. She never gave away one of those dresses to anybody. 15,000 dresses. All right, so she makes Imelda Marcos look like a cheapo, doesn't she? Okay, all right. The throne was left to Peter II and then later passed on to Catherine the Great. Now, Catherine the Great, here's Elizabeth's picture, and here's another one of her as a much older. Here is Catherine the Great. Catherine the Great, as you know, was not Russian. She was German. She was a German princess from a minor principality brought by her mother to Russia to marry Catherine the Great, Elizabeth's son, Peter III, who was the grandson of Peter the Great. But Paul turned out to be, to put it into 21st century vernacular, a nutcase, okay? He beat her. He threatened her with a knife. He would also walk his friends or a complete detachment up and down the palace halls all day long, and all he would do was march with them. He would make them march. In fact, he even made Catherine march with him, okay? So this one, he played war games all day long. That's all he did. Now, Elizabeth realized that he was kind of not all there. Okay, so she basically gave tacit approval to Catherine having a child from another man, and her son Paul was fathered by Sergei Saltykov to assure the succession, because I think Elizabeth was afraid that if there was no valid heir to the succession, then there would be perhaps a civil war, okay? Now, in June of 1762, another coup led by Gregory Orloff, who at that time was Catherine's lover, deposed Peter, who was then jailed and later secretly murdered by 2 or 3 assassins that came into the cell. Catherine was crowned empress in September of 1762, and she found that Russia was in financial ruins. There was a 17 million ruble deficit. The army had not been paid for 8 months. So there was corruption, extortion, and mismanagement were the norm, as were disease, ignorance, and poverty among the peasants. Now, in order to get things going, in order to have a coronation ceremony that would legitimize her rule, and there was no money, she went to Elizabeth's wardrobe and plundered it for the fabric and for the diamonds that were sewn into the dresses, okay? Genuine diamonds sewn into the dresses, okay? Now, she, however, was luxury was not her prime aim, because she was to reform agriculture and improve methods of farming. She especially admired the English methods of farming, and she brought foreign craftsmen to update the imperial porcelain factories. The School of Mines, she established a School of Mines to exploit the Siberian resources and encourage new factories to be built. John Paul Jones was also hired by her as the admiral of his navy. However, he left under clouded circumstances, being caught up in political intrigues. She didn't know how many people were living in the country, right? So she decided to have a census. She did not know the extent of her realm, so she engaged some scientists in going out and simply mapping the country so she would know how big everything was. There was town planning, the overseeing of prisons and orphanages, along with firefighting. Remember, most of those buildings were simply wood. Every town and every governor of every province had to establish a fire company to fight fires. In 1763, she established a college of medicine, charged with training medical personnel and hospitals that were set up in each provincial capital. In 1768, she called a Scottish physician, Dr. Thomas Dimsdale, to St. Petersburg, where she was inoculated against smallpox, which was, at that time, this was a very, very new and risky procedure. Thomas Jefferson and his children, took his 2 daughters, they went to Philadelphia in order to be inoculated against the smallpox, which left you devastated with scars, as you know. She herself became ill with a sore throat, and got a few spots, but she didn't get smallpox. She set Dimsdale up in a house in St. Petersburg and used the house as an inoculation clinic. In 1783, in order to prove that she was a equal opportunity employer, she appointed a Princess Dashkova as the first director of the Academy of Science. Not political. This was not a political appointment, as the princess was a very learned woman, and later on, as a matter of fact, even went to Paris and met none other than Benjamin Franklin. Okay? In 1786, a statute was established for schools, provisions for minor and major schools in each town. But there were no universities, because she knew there was no one who could man the universities, who could teach there. There was no one that had any kind of higher education. She built the Hermitage Theater, where she invited guests to perform and wrote several operas and stories for her grandchildren. Okay? Now we're going to talk about her collection. She was a glutton for collecting, okay? And she began doing an awful lot of collecting, and I'm going to tell you in a few minutes about the collections that she began. All right, here is Marianne Collot's statue, a little bust of Catherine the Great. She sculpts her as a very, very benevolent, matronly lady, and she and Catherine were very close. Even when Marianne Collot returned to France, married and had children, she still continued to correspond with Catherine the Great. And on the birth of, I believe, of her first baby, Catherine the Great even sent the baby a gift. Now, here is Catherine the Great's grandson, Nicholas I. He was the complete autocrat, very much like Peter the Great. It was his way or the Siberian highway, if you know what I mean. Now, In 1837, he ordered the building of a fireplace in one of the rooms of the Winter Palace. The architect dared to tell him that it could be dangerous, but after an imperious look from the Tsar, the architect hastily began building the fireplace. A few months later, after it was constructed, a maid decided to start a fire in the fireplace. Suddenly, the fireplace started smoking. So they decided that the chimney must be blocked. So they shoved a mop up the chimney, which of course just made the mop catch on fire. So soon the entire palace was burning, and this was on December the 17th. It was very cold, it was snowy, etc. The Tsar and his wife were off at the ballet, okay? So somebody had to run and tell the Tsar the palace is burning, all right? So they came back, and the Tsar and his wife and all the guards were running in and out of the palace trying to save as much as possible. At one point, the guards were trying to take down a big mirror. They knew it was the Tsar's favorite mirror, and they're struggling to take it down. The Tsar came along, broke the mirror, and told them to get on their way and get moving and pick up other things as well. Everything was brought out, including the imperial jewels that were rescued, was brought out of the palace, put on the snow, and they posted guards around it so it wouldn't get stolen. As they were leaving the palace, a backdraft blew open a door, and a huge chandelier was sucked out. Jewelry, paintings, and icons were all brought out and, again, surrounded by the guards. The palace burned until the next morning, so it was just about completely destroyed. Well, despite the fact that it was minus 35 degrees centigrade, Nicholas decided he wanted to start rebuilding, and it was going to be rebuilt within a year, so serfs were brought from all over Russia to labor, even in the wintertime, to rebuild that palace. Now, let's look at Alexander II. He is considered the last great Tsar. He became Tsar in 1855 and was assassinated in 1881. He instituted many reforms, including the freeing of the serfs in 1861. And the serfs were given land. The serfs were given land and a certain amount of limited freedom, and the government compensated the owner with bonds, and the peasants would repay slowly over the years. But the scheme failed as the land was very poor and farming methods were so backward that the peasants just couldn't pay for the land, okay? Now, in 1866, he established a state bank to stabilize the currency, and that was the year that he made the Hermitage Museum free to everyone. Anyone could go in. Prior to that, you could really only get in if you were a foreigner. When Catherine the Great was still the empress, there was a British man who came for some reason to St. Petersburg, and he was allowed to walk through. If you were a foreigner, you could get in, but a native-born Russian could not. But Tsar Alexander changed that. In 1879, there was a carpenter who was hired to work at the Winter Palace. He noted that the security was very lax at the palace, and he went to one of these revolutionary groups called the People's Will and offered to blow the palace up. Well, they thought that was just a delightful idea, okay? Now, so this carpenter began taking in small amounts dynamite into the palace. He hid the dynamite he was sleeping in the basement. He hid the dynamite under his pillow. Now, you know, dynamite is very, very volatile. It sweats and it could burn and whatnot. Anyway, so in February of 1880, the carpenter invited all his fellow carpenters to a restaurant to celebrate his engagement. That was because he wanted to get all the carpenters out of the palace, you see, okay? So they were at the restaurant. He said, I'm going to go get my fiancée and bring her over here. There was no fiancée, okay? He goes back to the basement. He had a trunk filled with 280 pounds of dynamite, and he set the wire, and he came out, and he said, there was one of his cronies was there. He said, it's all ready to go, okay? Now, the family dinner was at 6 o'clock that night, and he knew this. As the family entered the dining room, there was a huge explosion. The marble floor seemed to rise up. The windows were blown out, chandeliers destroyed. Everything went dark because the gaslight was gone. You know, the gaslight connections were gone. 2 footmen were found, covered in plaster, still standing at attention. But the family was not hurt because the marble floor cushioned the impact. However, the first floor room was a dormitory for the guards, was a mass of dead and dying people with their limbs blown off. So this was the attempt on the Tsar's life, and it was the 5th attempt The sixth one was to be successful in 1881, where his coach was stopped, and I believe a bomb was thrown under the coach, and he was assassinated. Now, let's look up a little bit at the chronology of the Hermitage. Hermitage facts and figures is what we're going to talk about, to give you an idea of what we're going to see. First of all, there were 1,200 rooms in the palace, with 2,000 doors and windows, housing 33.5 million objects, not just paintings, other objects as well, okay? 1 million, which include 1 million coins as well, all right? 1 million coins, ancient and modern. 12,000 paintings. Now, the only museum that has more paintings in the world is the Louvre, because the Louvre has 30,000 paintings. The Hermitage only has 12,000 paintings, okay? Now, only 5% of its objects are on view at any one time because they simply don't have any more room. Wait a minute, now what? All right. The Hermitage extends more than a quarter mile along the Neva River. It is the largest museum, as I said, has 15 miles of galleries. And in 1769, the first collection of 225 paintings was acquired by Catherine the Great. December the 7th, which is St. Catherine's Day, is always celebrated as the date of the establishment of the Hermitage, no doubt in thanks to Catherine the Great. Well, what about the collections? Well, she began collecting, and she began, if I could do it this way, she literally vacuumed Europe up of all its paintings. Okay, I'm just going to run through a couple so you'll know what I'm talking about. In 1763, she started with a Gottkowski collection that came from Berlin with 225 paintings in it. In 1765, Prince Golitsyn, who was her agent in Paris, agreed to buy Denis Diderot's library that Catherine the Great allowed him to keep until he died. Thus, he was her personal librarian. By the way, I believe between Voltaire's collection and Diderot's collection, she bought 38,000 books. Okay? In 1768, she bought the Cabenzel collection. In 1769, one of the most important collections in the world at that time, the Bruhl collection, cost her 180,000 rubles. It had 4 Rembrandts, 1 Caravaggio, and 5 Rubens. And ships landed at the Neva River quayside, offloading huge crates became a common sight, and she would come out of the palace like a 5-year-old, jumping around and happy as a lark to get these paintings. Now, in 1771, just 2 years later, she bought the Crozat collection from Paris. He was the dealer for Antoine Watteau. 8 Rembrandts, 4 Veronese, 12 Rubens, 7 Van Dycks, and Van Dyck's portrait of Charles I went to Madame du Barry because she fancied that she had Stuart blood. Now remember 2 months ago when we talked about the Louvre, I also showed you a few Van Dyck paintings, so we're going to look at a few more today. In 1771, she bought 150 works from the Duc de Choiseul. In 1774, the first catalog of her paintings was published, 2,000 works of art. 1779, the greatest coup of all, the Walpole collection from England. 204 works, considered the most celebrated collection in the world, and was considered a perfect foundation for a national gallery in England. The English dithered, Catherine the Great came in and swept it all up. Okay? The English couldn't make up their mind. Horace Walpole called it an absolute theft, and she wrote at that time, this is a quote, "The Walpole paintings are no longer to be had for the simple reason that your humble servant has already got her claws on them, and would no more let them go than a cat would a mouse." Okay. Now, 1784, she's still going at it. 9 more Rembrandts, 2 more Rubens, and from the Comte de Baudouin, another French collector, she admitted that ego and prestige were part of her collecting mania. She said, "It is not the love of art, it is voracity. I am a glutton." Okay. Now, there were others as well, as I said. The Lyde Brown collection in 1787, and of course we talked about the burning of the museum and the Winter Palace in 1837. Now, during the siege of Leningrad, the staff remained at the museum day and night. Most items removed and stored. This went on for 24 hours a day for 6 days straight. We're going to talk more about the siege of Leningrad a little later. Now, here is the Hermitage chronology. Elizabeth built the Winter Palace from 1754 to 62. Catherine added to it the small Hermitage and the old Hermitage between 1774 and 1778. Catherine then built in the 1780s also the Hermitage Theater. And in 1852, Nicholas I allowed public exhibitions, actually, yes, 1852, Nicholas allowed public exhibitions and people were allowed to go in and it was free. Now, this is a picture of the Winter Palace. This is just part of it because it's much wider. I didn't have a wide-angle lens there, okay? Now, here is another picture of the Winter Palace from the Neva, and you can see how it stretches 1/4 of a mile along the Neva River. And here, the only way to really show is the map. Here is the plan of the Winter Palace, the small Hermitage, the old Hermitage, and the new Hermitage, and you can see what a vast institution it is. And I imagine, even if you spend a month there, you could not possibly see it all, I don't think. And most visitors go for maybe 1 or 2 days, and it's just an absolute treasure house of wonders. And what's so lovely, the rooms are just as beautiful as the art, because the rooms are just phenomenal. I can't describe them. I'm going to show you some pictures, okay? Here's the Hermitage Theater, by the way, done by a French architect. And here is the Jordan staircase. Now, this is the original Rastrelli design, and it was called at one time the Ambassador Staircase. It got its present name after the fire of 1837. The Jordan refers to the religious procession which took place on the Feast of Epiphany and symbolized the baptism of Christ in the River Jordan. Visitors walk up this staircase, just as royalty did on their way to the ball. And then you make a right, and this is what you see right there, at the top of the staircase, all right? Absolutely marvelous going in. It's just like, oh, it just takes your breath away. It truly does. Now, here is a monument to Francesco Rastrelli. This is not in St. Petersburg. It's right outside of town at Catherine's other palace. It was called the Catherine Palace at Tsarskoye Selo, which is 15 miles south of St. Petersburg. This is the Nicholas Hall. It was built after the 1837 fire. It is 1,103 square meters. It was used for official ceremonies and balls. And an entire regiment could fit into this room, so it was used for military parades on Epiphany. Now, this is what the Nicholas Hall looked like during World War I when it was used as a dormitory for wounded soldiers. This is what it looked like during the First World War. This is the Pavilion Hall. It was the assembly room for Catherine II, and it contains many treasures such as the peacock clock and mosaic tables by both Russian and Italian artisans. The room is lit with 28 crystal chandeliers, and it was completely redone in 1850. This is the council staircase. So called because meetings of state council were held on the ground floor of the Hermitage in the 19th century. It was redone, this staircase was redone under another architect, Staffen Schneider, in the 1850s. So you have two ways of getting to the top. This is the malachite room. Now, the finest malachite in the world comes from the Ural Mountains of Russia. It's that lovely green stone, and of course, as you can see, 2 tons of stone were used to decorate this room, including these lovely, right here. You can see these gueridons, which are on a pedestal and carved out with the malachite. Okay, now. Let's see now. This is the St. George Hall. The hall was ordered by Catherine the Great and recreated by Nicholas I. It is 800 square meters of white Carrara marble and bronze. In other words, all the marble was brought from Italy, okay? The parquet floors has 16 different kinds of wood in it. And it was known as the throne room between 1716 and 1917. All major ceremonies of the Romanovs, including ceremonial processions, took place here. These processions were called the Great Entries. And Tsarina Alexandra, the last Tsarina, absolutely loathed these processions. She was a very, very shy, quiet woman, and it was agony for her to come to these processions. And of course, everyone felt she was being snobbish, but she wasn't. It was just absolutely agonized. She just wanted to be with her husband, Nicholas, whom they dearly loved each other. It was a lifelong romance between Nicholas and Alexandra, and spent time with their children. They were very, very sheltered. They had this little bubble in which they lived, and had very little contact with the rest of the world. Here is another room. Many of the rooms in the Hermitage are called by the names of the artists who inhabit that room. This is called the Da Vinci Room because they have two Da Vincis, and we will look at this in a little while. Okay, the two doors, by the way. Let me see, the doors at the very end. You see those doors right there? They are made of bronze and tortoiseshell. Actual tortoiseshell forms the facade of each door, and the tortoiseshell is outlined in bronze, and they're absolutely gorgeous. Here is the Michelangelo room because it houses a statue by Michelangelo, which we'll look at in a few moments. Here is the Franz Snyder's Hall. Now, I have mentioned Franz Snyder's as one of the people who worked with Rubens. I mentioned that 2 months ago, and so many of his paintings are in the Hermitage that one entire room is devoted to all of his works, and you see they've got the paintings hanging one on top of the other, and in the center, of course, are the lovely hard stone torchères and urns, which were also carved by Russian and European artisans. Now, this is the White Hall. The White Hall houses. I've got to make sure I get this straight here. The White Hall was a ceremonial room where Alexander II was married. The Romanov balls were held here. 800 people working for 2 weeks to decorate with orchids and palm trees. Can you imagine orchids and palm trees in Russia in the middle of winter? All right. Guests went up the Jordan staircase lined with Cossacks and black hats and black servants in turbans. I don't know where they got the black servants from, but they had black servants. And then after the ball, you were served sumptuous food and desserts. It was really a Byzantine fairyland. Now it houses a French 18th century furniture and works by David Renshin. Here is another room called the Small Italian Skylight. Notice the table. The table is, of course, lapis lazuli. Now, the best lapis does not come from Russia. It comes from Afghanistan. And 2 days ago, I had a chance to talk to somebody who's just come back from Afghanistan because I'm trying to find out if those mines are still working. They were, as far as I know, in 2007. But he was unable to tell me whether or not those mines are still working or if they're played out or if there's such, terrorist activity that these people can't even get to work even if they wanted to. So I doubt that these mines are open. So there's a Small Italian Skylight room, which houses Italian paintings. By the way, 30 rooms in the Hermitage are used only for Italian paintings. And here is another one called the Italian Skylight Room. It's not the Small Skylight Room, it's called the Italian Skylight Room. And again, there is a malachite, the malachite, and this is porphyry or some other hard stone that I can't identify. But as you can see, every one of these rooms has furniture like this. This is just not 1 or 2 rooms. Every single room is more magnificent than the other. And of course, the ceilings. I think you could see it. I think on this you can see the ceiling. You can see how, and every ceiling is different. There's no repetition in any of the ceilings. Now, this is the Kolyvan vase. This, in the town of Kolyvan in the Urals, a huge vein of jasper was found. So this is named after the town where the stone was found. This is actually a bird bath for giant condors. Because it's 5 yards long, 3 yards wide. It took 11 years to carve it. In 1843, after it was carved, it was moved by 154 horses to a port where it was loaded on a ship. When they got it to St. Petersburg, they discovered that it was too large to move into the palace. So here's what they did. I mean, the Tsar was head over heels for this thing, okay? So they moved it to the Hermitage, where the walls of the room were built around it. And that's where it sits to this day. In other words, the room wasn't there, but when they put the vase there, and then they decided to build the room around it, okay? And it's absolutely marvelous. It truly is. This is the golden drawing room. I can see, you can see why they called it that. It was the waiting room for Tsar Maria Alexandrovna, and now these vitrines hold cameos and carved gems such as amethyst, onyx, agate, chalcedony, and other stones. They have, I believe they have the largest collection of carved gems in the entire world. Now, here is a room called the tent room, because of look at the ceiling. It's a tent ceiling. Now, it houses the Dutch 17th century works begun under Catherine the Great, and now contains over 1,000 Dutch paintings in all the genres. Now we're getting to I'm going to segue into World War II. This is the tent room as it looks today. This is the tent room as it looked at the beginning of World War II. You can see that all the paintings have been removed from their frames. It is possible to do that because you remove the painting from the frame, you take it off its stretcher, which is the support for the back, and then you can roll it up just like you might roll up some wax paper, okay, in one of those rolls. And this makes them much more portable. Now, the frames were left there as a help when you brought the paintings back, which painting goes in which frame. I'm sure they came up with a scheme, a coding scheme of some sort. You will also see here in the front some sand with a shovel in it. Every room of the Hermitage had sand with a shovel so that if a fire started, you could at least contain the fire in that particular room. Now, there were very, very few pictures of the Hermitage at this point because Stalin, being the maniac that he was, had refused and had all cameras confiscated so that nobody could take any pictures of anything, okay? All private cameras were confiscated because he was obviously very, very paranoid. Didn't want to even have a picture taken. So that's why these pictures, there are very, very few of these pictures extant today because nobody had a camera. All right, now what happened? Well, from August 8, 1941 until the 27th of January, 1944, we call it the Siege of Leningrad, and we know it took 900 days. 1/3 of the population died, mostly of starvation. They were eating cats, dogs, horses, and the wallpaper paste, because the wallpaper paste had flour in it, okay? So they were eating wallpaper paste. Here's a picture during the Hall of 12 Columns. I didn't show you the picture, but here is it after a direct hit from a shell. The museum was hit by 32 shells and 2 bombs. All the windows were shattered. 5 acres of glass was boarded up with plywood. Here we see the packing that went of the treasures that went on in 1941. When the Russians realized that the Nazis were not going to honor the pact they had made with the Russians, the director at that time of the Hermitage began gathering all sorts of packing equipment, any kind of paper or straw or hay, anything that he could get his hands on, okay? Sand, paper, straw, hay, whatever. Because he knew he would have to pack all these items up in order to keep them away from the Nazis, all right? Now, this shows the packing. The packing went on 24 hours a day for 6 solid days without stopping, because they had to get all this stuff packed, put in crates, and they had carpenters making crates and shipping it out. The first train left on July 1st, left with 500,000 items to Ekaterinburg, and it was most of which was stored in the home where Nicholas and his family died. Now, that house was there until the 1980s when, let me see, Boris Yeltsin demanded that it be destroyed because he didn't want it to turn into a shrine for the Romanovs. So the house was destroyed under Boris Yeltsin. He was another drunk, so they destroyed the house. All right. Okay. Second train. The second train left on July 20th. 23 freight cars with just under 1 million items. The staff was also engaged in digging trenches. Everyone in St. Petersburg at that time, it was a concerted effort to dig trenches around the city so the Nazis wouldn't be able to get into the city with their tanks. So the staff was also commandeered to go and do some of the digging. And some people were literally falling asleep on their feet because it was just unbelievable. Now, the third train was supposed to have left on August the 30th, but by that time it could not leave because the Nazis had cut the rail line. So 351 crates could not be moved. They stored them in the Long Westrelli Gallery. They stored them in the basement. Also, many of the precious porcelains, the Sèvres and whatnot that the Hermitage has, were stored in the basement, and they were covered over with sand with the idea that you would minimize any damage, or if the building were bombed or a shell were landed in the building. Okay, the museum now. The basement became a bomb shelter for the staff and the families. The museum was guarded night and day with anti-aircraft guns on the roof. And many of the guards were women in their 70s because they needed the healthy young people to do other things, to join the army and to do any kind of defense of the city that they could. Even to this day, if you go to the Hermitage, you will see these little old retired ladies. There's a chair for them, and each of them takes care of one room. They get up and they walk around and they can sit down again. They're not wearing a uniform. They're just pensioners, and this is the way they earn a few kopecks for themselves. Now, food eventually ran out for the staff, so they subsisted on eating furniture glue, which was made of natural. It was not, glue today is artificial chemicals for us, but in those days, the glue that they used came from boiling animals and then skimming that paste off. So that's what they landed up doing. They ate it like it was jelly. If you were lucky enough to have a piece of bread, you'd spread a little bit of that on, and that's what they ate because there was nothing else to eat, all right? Now, most of the staff survived, but the cellar was also turned into a mortuary. In April of 1942, 46 frozen corpses were picked up for burial because you couldn't bury anybody. I mean, it was just you had to, especially in the winter, you can't bury anyone. But in the spring, they obviously picked up because they realized that it would spread disease if you simply could not get these bodies into the ground. Now, what happened to all these paintings during the Revolution? To this entire art collection? Well, at the start of the Russian Revolution, about 2 years afterward, all art collections were nationalized. In other words, they stole them, okay? All right. Items were shuffled constantly between the Hermitage and Moscow because the Bolsheviks couldn't decide where they should send the paintings. Send it to Moscow. Nope, we're sending it back from Moscow. And of course, the curators were going crazy. They were going nutsy. They really, really were. Now, the curators themselves would lose their job, especially if they were of noble birth, or they could be arrested for charges like being an enemy of the people, an economic counter-revolutionary, whatever that is. And a woman curator was arrested as being an economic counter-revolutionary, and she couldn't make sense of the phrase. What does it mean? Now, of course, you couldn't ask what it meant because there were no such things as trials, and for thousands of intellectuals, that was simply the firing squad. So they destroyed the aristocracy, who are the purveyors, let's say, of tradition and art and culture. They destroyed the intelligentsia, who were, of course, the purveyors of ideas, and there was nothing left but illiterate peasants, okay? Now, there were a number of private collectors. Two families in particular, the Shukin family and the Morozov family. They had marvelous collection of contemporary art. When I say contemporary, I mean Van Gogh, Picasso, Matisse, etc., okay? Shukin and Morozov wanted to leave. Some of the family went first to Switzerland, okay, because they realized that things were not going very well. They were allowed to leave, but their artworks were not allowed to leave, even those that by Van Gogh, Matisse, and Picasso, which were considered degenerate bourgeois art anyway. The peasants didn't know what the heck they were looking at, okay? Now, Stalin became very desperate for money, and he began selling off works of art to buy machinery to, shall we say, to bring the country into the 20th century, okay? He even sold grain, which left a flour shortage, and Russians starved to death, but he didn't care, okay? Now, I'm going to show you two paintings, which were in Russia at that time, and they were nationalized, but, well, one of them was nationalized, but neither of those paintings are there. Both of them are now in the United States. How did they get here? Well, I'll tell you. It's a very interesting backstory. Here is Van Eyck's famous Annunciation from 1435. Jan van Eyck and his brother were the leading artists of the 15th century, and their works are very rare. They made many innovations, including the use of oils in paintings. Prior to that, the only medium they could use with the paint was egg. And it was an actual temper. You would use, every morning you'd come in, you'd break an egg, you'd use the egg yolk with the paint, and you'd mix it all together, and that's what you painted. They did not use oil. But when the Van Eycks began using oil, they were able to achieve these jewel-like colors, which just fascinated everybody. And here is one of the prime pieces of, prime masterworks of Jan van Eyck, namely the Annunciation. Now, Andrew Mellon, at the time in 1930, was art secretary of the Treasury. He was a banker and he was an avid art collector. Through a dealer, he bought this work from the Russians for $503,000, which was a bargain because after he bought it, a dealer offered him $750,000 for it, okay? And he deliberately bought it in April, May of 1930 because to avoid a tax that was imposed by the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act that went into law in June of 1930. So 1 month before that law went into effect, he bought this painting. He was later brought up by the IRS on charges of tax cheating because he took a $3.5 million deduction donating paintings to his charitable trust. In other words, we hear a lot about charitable trusts, don't we? Yeah, don't we ever? Okay. I won't even mention any names. You know what I'm talking about. Okay, now. But Mellon was really a very generous man, because he paid for the National Gallery to be built and donated the works, so you and I own a piece of this painting and all the works that are in that National Gallery, okay? So he should not be excoriated because he literally gave it all away, okay, to us. Now, another painting, this is in the National Gallery in Washington, of course. Another painting. This one is at the Metropolitan, but in the 1920s, it was 1920, it was in Russia. How did it get here? There were only 36 Vermeers, extant Vermeers, known today, and there probably won't be any others turning up, okay? This painting was owned by a Dutch art historian, Abraham Bredius, in 1899. He was the one who found it and discovered this Vermeer that was misattributed to some other artist. Eventually, it landed up when Bredius died, and by the way, Bredius was a very prominent art historian, and he was taken in by the Vermeer forgeries, and it really destroyed his reputation. It truly did. Now, it landed up in the collection of a Berlin dealer. And Dmitri Shukin, one of the Shukins from the ones that I was just telling you about, purchased it from a Berlin dealer and took it back to Russia, and none of his friends liked it. Nah, I don't like that very much. So in other words, it's just like a woman who buys a handbag and her friends say, oh, that's so last year, and she immediately returns it. Well, that's exactly what Dmitri Shukin did. He decided he didn't like it either, so he took it back to the dealer, and the dealer even gave him a little more money back than what he had paid for it, okay? Now, in 1928, it is acquired for $300,000 by Michael Friedsam and given to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where it sits today. And it has 4 other companions as well. The Metropolitan has 5 Vermeers, and if you walk down the street to the Frick Museum, you will see 3 more Vermeers. So in other words, basically just about 1/4 of all the Vermeers are on one block in New York City. So you can see 8 of them in one day. And if you go down to the National Gallery, you can also see, I believe there were 2 more in the National Gallery as well. So we're very, very fortunate in having the ones that we have. Now, with the Met's account about this is slightly different. They don't mention the Russian connection. All they mention is that it was bought by Michael Friedsam in 1928 and given to the Metropolitan, okay? Now we're going to start talking about the art treasures of the Hermitage. Let me excuse the print on that. That's not the way I constructed it. It's much nicer, but unfortunately, it's the way the machine reads it, and it's not reading the font that I used in this particular slide. All right, so we're going to start talking. Start first about the Italians, because I want to show you the two Leonardos they have. This one is called the Benois Madonna. It was painted in 1478, and it is considered an early Leonardo, and purchased in 1914 from a Monsieur Benois, after whom it is named. The chubby baby is being given a bitter cress flower. His mother is giving him a flower to hold, and it's a bitter flower. Again, it's symbolic of the Passion. I want you to notice the lovely sfumato of the young mother's face, and the highlights on the baby's knees and whatnot. The baby looks like a baby. He does not look like a little miniature man, but he looks like a typical chubby Italian bambino, okay? And the baby's gesture is a very, very human, warm gesture. It is not a benediction gesture. It is not the gesture of a god. It is simply the gestures of a little baby that's playing with the flower that his mother holds. Now, the lighting comes from the left. It does not come from the window. There is a window behind, but there is the lighting does not come from there. The lighting comes diagonally across. And notice how the baby sits on the mother's lap so charmingly and gives so much attention to that little flower. Here is the other one, called the Litta Madonna, okay? It was purchased in 1865 from Count Litta of Milan. The Madonna here is humanized in the act of nursing. There is an elegance of the sfumato with, again, the same windows that Leonardo used in the Virgin of the Rocks, the same, shall we say, landscape beyond, a very, very craggy, rocky, forbidding type landscape. Now, these two paintings were not removed from their stretchers when they evacuated all the paintings from the Hermitage. They were simply crated. They were afraid to remove them for fear that they would damage them. They were simply put in a crate and taken, but they're relatively small. They are not large, so they were easy to crate. Now, here is Michelangelo's Crouching Boy from 1530s. It's part of the Medici funerary chapel, which was never finished, okay? The figure seems to be emerging from the stone, which is a quality seen in many of Michelangelo's unfinished works. Those of you who have been to Florence, no doubt, have seen the unfinished works of Michelangelo. It is as if he saw potential in the stone, and that all he had to do was carve out the extraneous parts of the stone, and the figure would emerge. Very, very interesting indeed. Now, Catherine the Great brought this, by the way, and the authenticity has been questioned. So I don't know about I haven't researched the rationale for questioning the authenticity, but it is nonetheless very, very an arresting piece of work. Now, here is a Carracci. Annibale Carracci was the leading Baroque artist from Bologna. The gestures, the colors, and the rake light intensify the drama of Christ's disappearance from the tomb. This was bought in 1836 from an English collection, the Cossevelt collection. It's taken to Amsterdam to be auctioned. Again, it was bought by Alexander in 1836, and it was another loss. The Cossevelt collection was another loss for the English nation. I also want to apologize for the pictures. They look very dark, but they are not dark in real life, because remember, you are looking at a reproduction of a reproduction, and it's being taken from my machine into the PowerPoint projector, and that's the resolution of color that we get. It's very shadowy, and I'm very sorry for that. Now, the next painting here I want you to see is the great Caravaggio's Lute Player. This is a youthful work, done when he was yet, maybe 19, 20 years old. All right, he was quite a boy wonder, shall we say. And the musical themes which he did numerous musical themes for his patron, Cardinal del Monte, who had, shall we say, a penchant for little boys and loved paintings like this. He was also a very cultured man and was very, very interested in classical music. Now, the figure itself is very androgynous. Look at the face. The face could be that of a young girl or a young lad. And I want you also, invariably with these, you have a marvelous still life in the front, which just catches your attention. There are some pears there. There is a vase of flowers. There is, again, the bow placed diagonally across the very weathered-looking, manhandled music, and the violin, which also is placed on a diagonal into our space, as if we could take it off the painting itself. So let's go on to the Dutch and the Flemish. Here is Rembrandt's Return of the Prodigal Son. It is considered by many to be the greatest work of art that the Hermitage has. It is extremely large, and there was a question as to whether or not they would remove it from the frame and the stretcher in order to, send it away. They did not. They constructed a crate for it. They were so afraid that, now this painting was even then almost 300 years old, and they decided to construct a crate for it and send it that way. Now, the great Night Watch, which is in Amsterdam at the Rijksmuseum, they decided to take that. Now, that painting, if you've seen it, you know it's life-size. You could step into it. It's so huge. They took it off the stretcher, and they rolled it on a huge roller, okay? And it had to be huge because the painting is about 9 or 10 feet tall, so it had to be a huge roller. They rolled it on a huge roller, and then the painting was hidden because, again, they were afraid of looting by the Nazis, and it would definitely have been looted for Hitler's Linz Museum, the museum that he was going to put all the greatest works of art in. Well, no doubt that would have been expropriated for that museum. But here we see, again, this is a late work of Rembrandt. He died in 1669, and he continued with his very strong light and shadow and the shadows which are so marvelously expressive. Now the son has come home, and the father lays his hands gently on the son's back, and look at how the cape embraces the father, and you have this lovely oval right here of the hands going completely around, while people are onlookers, and the son who is not the prodigal son sees the scene and becomes very, very jealous of the fact that the father is welcoming back this wastrel who doesn't even have, he only has one shoe on his feet, the other shoe is gone. I mean, he's literally barefoot and a total wastrel, and barefoot and wearing rags, and yet the father welcomes him back with such a wonderful gesture. Here is Rembrandt Saskia, Flora as Saskia, done the year that he married her in 1634. You know that she predeceased him and that she left only one child. They lost 3 of their children. Now, the same year, it was done in 1634, the same year he married her. He paints her in a beautiful golden light with an elaborate headdress. And look at how beautiful these sleeves come up and down and reflect the lining, which is this beautiful apple green silk. And she holds a staff with flowers and wears flowers in her hair. And she's absolutely gorgeous. And this type of work, Rembrandt was masterful at this feeling of tapestry. The textural feeling of the works are just marvelous. And in many cases, he built up the paint layers. He built them up. If you go and look at the Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer, and you look at it, the belt has been built up about 1 inch off the canvas in order to give a tactile quality to it. And here, this is Rembrandt's Holy Family. This was brought to the Met in the 1980s when they had a Rembrandt show. And it is basically a Dutch domestic scene with angels descending. And they're the tender gesture of Mary as she watches over her sleeping child. And notice the light coming in, how that heavenly light touches her face and the book she is reading. And there is also light on the child's, on the robe of the child, and the lovely wicker basket. You can see the texture of that basket, the little cradle in which the child sleeps. And Joseph, by the way, I know it's hard to see, but Joseph is in the background there, plying his trade as a carpenter, doing some work while Mary watches the child, and there is a little open fire right there, okay? And the humility of it, the humbleness, and yet the beauty of it is just, this is worth going to Russia to see. I've seen it in the Met, but this is worth going to Russia just to see this painting, because it's just heartbreakingly beautiful. That's the only way I can say it, okay? Now, this also, you realize, was done after Saskia had died and left him with their first three children had died in infancy. Not one of the first three children lived longer than, I believe, a month. The last child lived, but Saskia died, probably of tuberculosis, no doubt. She was suffering from TB. And the baby was born, and 8 months later, she died. And he did this a year after she died. So you can imagine, he must have poured so much of his own agony and his own sorrow at losing her into this painting. But it is just marvelously beautiful. Now here is Gerard Dou. Remember we talked about him 2 months ago as the pupil of Rembrandt, the first pupil that Rembrandt took, and he perfected the idea of people in the window, and we showed his self-portrait as well. Now here, the Hermitage has 3 Doux, okay? And this one is called The Old Woman Unreeling Threads from 1660. Catherine the Great brought it, again, good old Catherine the Great in 1768. The Gagnac collection included 3 Doux. And what we see is an old woman at a window. And there are 2 sources of light. The light that comes from inside and the light that comes from from the window right here. We can see the raked light. And she is winding something on reeling or unreeling threads. You really can't tell what she is doing, okay? And she sits there with a very intense look of concentration upon her face. Her mouth is part open and her tongue is on her lip, and she's trying really, really hard to do this and get this correct. But again, it's a marvelous, and look at the ruffle around her neck, how beautifully he's done that. Very, 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 very good. And you see here the highlight on her knee. You can tell that's her knee right there. There's a highlight on the knee, you see. Okay? And this is Hals. Now, we have seen Hals laughing figures, but this one is the man with a glove from 1650. Now, the man, as you can see, has one glove on, and he's putting the other glove on, preparing to go out. Now, as I have mentioned, I think I may have mentioned to you that gloves at that time were a symbol of, were a status symbol. Obviously, those appear to be leather gloves, and they're gauntlet length. They're much longer. They cover the end of his sleeve, okay? And gloves like that, leather gloves like that, would have been very expensive, probably even custom made. So gloves were a status symbol in those days. Today, rubber gloves and gardening gloves and, gloves for working, shoveling snow, and gloves to keep your hands warm. They're common. But in those days, if you had a pair of gloves like that, you would wear them very proudly because it was part of your ensemble, and it would show that you were a very prosperous person. But just wonderful. He has this sense of immediacy, the sense of that man's going to walk out of that painting any second because he's putting on his gloves and he's going out. And this is a De Hoek, Mistress and the Maid, from 1657. Alexander I bought it in 1808, and Baron Dinon of the Louvre acted as his agent in Paris. This is the very first De Hoek bought for the Hermitage, and was part of the sale that also included Caravaggio's lute player. So we got 2 treasures, right there, the two beautiful treasures. De Hoek is famous for his courtyard scenes that give a view into the surrounding area. But they are composed very carefully with a geometric composition. Now look at this one. First of all, we see these tiles that recede right along the path, and our eye carries into the path and beyond. And then we see a figure walking along the canal, and this is the house. Between the two trees, we see the roof, the upper story and the roof of the house that's across the canal. Now, the lady is seated here, and you can see she is defined by the fence right here, and there's also obviously a bench right here as well. And then we have another archway right here, another archway, and you have a gate that's been opened so that you can go through the archway, see through the trees. So it sets up an absolutely wonderful view, and our eyes are allowed to kind of go in and meander around and get an idea of what 17th century Amsterdam really was like. There's only one place I know where, then it's not in Amsterdam, it's in Haarlem. The town in Haarlem where the museum, the Frans Hals Museum is located. When you turn down that street, it's like you're stepping back into 17th century Holland, because the sidewalks are very narrow, the streets are still lined with cobblestone, and all these little Dutch houses, one after the other. It really is almost like you step back 300 years. But this is absolutely marvelous. And De Hoek also, very, very famous. The Dutch like to use, and De Hoek especially, like to use these earth tones. And you can see in the red of her dress here, and the gold of the basket, and the red of the bricks of the house, and there's this little golden path, almost golden path, going through to the opposite side, and there is someone on the opposite side of the river. Now, here is a Rubens landscape with a rainbow. Oh, I didn't put Rubens' name there, I'm sorry. We have an idealized landscape with two young lovers here. And this, Rubens, by the way, was to use these two people again in the Garden of Love, the Garden of Earthly Delights, Garden of Love. And there we see somebody who's minding the sheep, all right, and playing. He's a shepherd playing a pipe. Here is another young couple seated on the ground. There is sheep grazing here. And then in behind, our eye is allowed to wander in, and there behind we see a lovely old stone bridge that crosses the river, and there are a few little buildings behind that, a little village behind that. And look at how beautiful. The rain has stopped, and there is this lovely rainbow, and the sky is turning blue again. Between the trees, we have this lovely arc of the rainbow. And it's very, very pastoral, very, very calm, very, very soothing painting to look at. Now, this also was acquired by Catherine the Great in 1769 in the Bruhl collection. By the way, there were 600 paintings that she bought. In one fell swoop, she bought the entire thing. She didn't pick and choose. She said, I'll take it all. Okay. She took it all. She never refused. I'll take it all, give it all to me, I'll buy it. Okay. Just like going into I don't know, into Macy's or something and looking at all that stuff and saying, I'll take the whole rack. You know. Okay. Now, here's oops, let me see here. Here is Van Dyck's self-portrait, okay? Again from the Bruhl collection. She got this too, Catherine the Great. A youthful Van Dyck strikes a pose used extensively in the 17th century, but especially he places the emphasis on the hands. Whoops, sorry. Here are the hands, all right? Because, of course, they are the artist's tool. And then behind him, there is a drapery that was drawn back, and he leans on the column. The column is symbol of fortitude and of trustworthiness. But look at the clothing he's wearing. He's showing you that he is a successful artist. He's young, he's handsome, okay? He is wearing a doublet with slashes here to show the satin or silk of his shirt underneath. Very, very elegantly dressed, which of course is another way of advertising that I am a successful artist. Look at the clothes I can wear, okay? So again, this was another painting that Catherine the Great bought from the Bruhl collection. And here is another Van Dyck, the lady with the tulip. And again, we see, look at her sleeves. Look at how beautifully he does that. This is from the Walpole collection of 1779. John Wilkes, who was the British politician and reformer, advised Parliament to buy the collection and turn it into a national gallery for the people. But as I said, while the English dithered, Catherine came in and vacuumed it up, okay? And this is one of the paintings she got. It's signed here, and we also know that it's the lady is Jane Goodwin, or her name is Jane Goodwin, and she's holding a tulip. Now, the tulip is already past its ripe, it's overripe, shall we say. But this, by the way, this is the loveliest shade of rose pink you can imagine. I know it isn't coming across that way, but that's what it is. It's a beautiful rose pink, and we get a suggestion of a landscape in the background. Now, it was fashionable in the 17th and 18th century, when you painted a portrait of a woman, to have her walking in the garden. In other words, like she's strolling among the flowers. Now, we're going to the French. We saw some Greuze last time, but I'm showing you another one. Catherine the Great loved Greuze, all right? And she got this from, this is one she bought directly from him. She had asked her ambassador, Prince Golitsyn, to send her anything by Monsieur Greuze. He complied, even sending her a self-portrait. The usual we see the usual high drama with this. The grandfather is very ill. He's a paralytic, and it shows the family gathered around caring for him in his old age and concerned. And we see the love of the family, the little baby reaching up for grandpa, and the other grandson is at his knees and whatnot. And in other words, it teaches a moral lesson that one cares for those who have cared for you. One cares for them when the time comes. Now, this subject matter, again, was to illustrate middle-class values and moral values. Again, she acquired it, this painting was done in 1763, and Catherine the Great acquired it in 1766. Here's another Chardin, now, by the way, the greatest collection of French art outside of France is at the Hermitage in the Louvre. And the Hermitage in Russia. Thanks to Catherine the Great and her great-great-grandson, who, with his wife, Maria and Alexander, would go to Paris, and they would buy up all these paintings and all these works of art, and they would go to London, and they would go to the dealers, and they would buy all this stuff up wholesale and have it shipped back. That is one of the reasons that they have the largest collection of French art in the world outside of the collection at the Louvre. Now, here we see Chardin's a still life with attributes of the arts. And of course, there is the sculpture right here. There is a palette for the artist. There were also what looks like architectural drawings. Well, architecture is one of the arts, is it not? And books of learning, etc. And this is the kind of thing that Chardin really excelled at doing. As a matter of fact, sometimes they were shaped so that they would fit over a door, and they were shaped as a lunette, and they were called overdoors because they would hang over a door. This was quite common in France in the 18th century. Now here, I promised to show you a V.J. Lebrun, and there are a number of V.J.s in Russia. Well, naturally there would be. She spent 6 years there. And when all these collections were nationalized, many of the families had kept these paintings, so now they have landed up in the Hermitage. And here is the Baroness Stroganova and her son from 1795. Remember, we saw a number of paintings that she had done of herself with her daughter, and she had done paintings of babies and other mothers. So she had a wonderful feeling for the warmth of a mother for her child. And here the little boy is being embraced by mommy, and he's reaching up to touch her, and a very, very baby-like gesture. And she's using two of the colors. Remember, we talked about the fact that she loved to use gold and white together, and this, of course, is one of her favorite color schemes. The other one was using red, black, and white, which was also very, very dramatic and effective as well. By the way, did any of you manage to get in to see the V.J. Lebrun exhibit at the Met? Oh, you did? A couple people did go. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you did. It was wonderful, but unfortunately, as I told you, it was only about half of the collection that I saw in Paris. And there was a lot of room on those walls. Many of those walls looked terribly empty to me. There was a lot of room on those walls. They easily could have gotten in a dozen more paintings, easily. And I don't know why that they got such a small percentage of the paintings that were in Paris. Now, here is Renoir's portrait of Jean Saint-Marie, one of his favorite models. She appears in his Luncheon of the Boating Party, which, by the way, is at the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C. We are lucky enough to have it because Mr. Phillips, in 1920, decided to buy it, and he said, I think I paid too much money for it, but it's such a wonderful painting. And of course, the French would love to have it back, but that's not going to happen, okay? Now, she is in that painting. And he uses here the impressionist device of the compositional device. Notice her train. By the way, this is a pink dress. It's not white. It's pink, all right? And he cuts off the train. The Impressionists were very impressed by the innovations of photography, which is still in its infancy, and they noticed that when pictures were taken, certain things were cut off along the edge. So he uses that device right here and cuts off the end of her train. And behind her is a beautiful gold scroll of the Oriental scroll, and just beautifully done. Very, very lovely indeed. And Renoir was absolutely consummate with doing beautiful paintings of women like this, dancers and whatnot, just wonderful. Now, this was part of the Mikhail Morozov collection, which the Bolsheviks took away from the Morozov family, okay? Now, one of them, either the Morozovs or the Shukas, I believe it's the Morozovs, a number of the family members live in Paris because most of your Russians who left Russia went to Paris, and you know the reason why, because they could speak French. They didn't go to England or to America. Very few of them, they went to France. And the Morozovs have instituted a suit because they don't want the paintings back. They want the Russian government to pay them for the paintings. The Russians refuse to do it, and whenever they loan a painting to another museum, there is a clause in the contract that they guarantee that the painting will be returned and that any foreign claims will not be honored by the museum to which the painting is lent, because they're so paranoid that which it should be returned to the family. It really should, or else there should be reparations paid. Okay, but the Russians don't see it that way. Now, here is another. Is from the Sergei Shukin collection, Monet's Lady in a Garden from 1867. It was a favorite Impressionist theme used very frequently by Monet, because at the time there were ladies' magazines, fashion magazines that were published, and they didn't use photographs, they used engravings. And most of the engravings would show the newest fashions with ladies walking through a garden. So that's how Monet picked up on this and did many paintings of women in gardens. And here is a very fashionable lady with the parasol walking through the garden. Look at the shadows right there. And there's this lovely area right here in the middle with the red flowers and the tree. It's very, very cultivated. It's very, very refined. It's obviously a garden that is very well taken care of. And she's walking through the garden. And this, again, was in the Sergei Shukin collection, which they had to leave in Russia. Now, the next one is Van Gogh's Thatched Cottages from 1890. This Shukin and Morozov were brilliant collectors, buying items that were contemporary, and which they saw the new vision of these artists and how important this was going to be. Their instincts told them that these artists were on the cutting edge of the modernity. You can see that Van Gogh's nervous brushstrokes give this work a vibrancy that infuses all of his work. Just marvelous. And again, the colors here are not true to life, okay? They are much brighter and much more vivid and intense. Now, how many of you here have ever been to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam? Anyone here ever gone there? Oh, wonderful, wonderful, absolutely fabulous, is it not? Now, I'm going to show you two more, and this one is really considered one of the commanding works of the 20th century, namely The Dance by Matisse. The strong colors and the lack of perspective, it's very flat. But Matisse composition wasn't so as important as creating a pattern and a harmony of colors. And what I want you to look at is not only the 5 figures, but also look at the spaces between them and the patterns that he creates. And the V here, in fact, it's almost a heart shaped right here. Okay, and the hands right here, and the beautiful patterns they're created by the 5 dancing figures. Now, Matisse was to influence the work of the colorists, such as Rothko and other 20th century artists. Of course, when the Bolsheviks saw this, they shrugged their shoulders, but they wanted it anyway. They wanted it anyway, okay? And they got it. It hung in. This was Morozov. I believe it was, or Shukin. I cannot remember. I did not write it here, and I should have. It hung in the living room. As a matter of fact, there were pictures of his living room with this hanging above the sofa. And it's a very large painting. It's not a small painting. It's a very large painting. And one last one that I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you a Picasso. Now this, to a Russian of the time, would have been absolutely something you throw in the garbage can, okay? Here, Picasso reduces the figures to a series of angular planes. The face resembles an African mask that he was very familiar with and was fascinated with at the time. He extracts all the unnecessary lines and leaves just the essence of the figure itself. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is the decorative objects that are at the Hermitage. But I'm also going to show you some Fabergé. And the Fabergé I'm going to show you are the eggs. It was suggested to me that I put this in the lecture because there was such an interest in it. So we're going to start with one of the decorative objects that, believe it or not, was found in 1897 at an excavation of a Scythian burial mound in the Caucasus Mountains. Now, the work there had been going on since the 18th century. And Peter the Great, when he found out what was being dug up, ordered that everything that was dug up be sent to him. So all the artifacts, whether they be stone or metal or whatever, have all been sent to the Hermitage, and they have probably the finest collection of archaeological artifacts, because everything automatically went. You couldn't. Generally speaking, when you have a expedition like that, half of it or 3/4 of it goes to the government, and the other part of it goes to the archaeologists who dig it up, and then it goes into a museum. So something might be in Egypt, but it might also be in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But in this case, everything went to the Hermitage. Now, this is the Scythian gold deer. It dates to the late 7th century BC. The pose of the deer with his branched antlers and his neck reaching out give it a feeling that he will leap at any moment. And look at the way they've done those antlers. It looks almost Art Nouveau, does it not? It has an Art Nouveau quality to it. Now, a loop on the back indicates that the piece could be worn as a decoration on a Scythian quiver for arrows. However, the object weighs 750 grams, which is almost 3 pounds. And we are talking about solid gold, not 14 karat, okay? So you can figure out, based on an ounce of gold, how much this actually is worth just for the gold. The site was discovered, as I said, under Peter the Great, who commanded that everything found be sent directly to him. So this was the start of their archaeological and decorative arts collection. Another piece that from the 4th century BC is this one, the Scythian comb. This shows the skill of their goldsmiths to replicate texture and an arresting composition, because this shield and this shield is the opposite of this one. So they balanced it so beautifully. And in order to provide a transition for the eye from the warring figures to the comb, they have put a frieze here of 5 lions, 5 recumbent lions, to serve as a transition from this to this. Absolutely marvelous, absolutely marvelous. And this was done in the 4th century BC. And it looks brand new, doesn't it? But you realize gold is the noble metal. And it does not, when it's buried, it does not lose its luster at all. Silver will deteriorate. Gold will not, So it looks like, you know, like it was done yesterday, even though it was done almost 2,000, well, more than 2,000 years ago. Now, another thing we're going to look at. This is a swan pendant from 1590. It was quite common in the 16th century to take a natural curiosity, such as this marvelous Baroque pearl. Now, a Baroque pearl is one that's irregular. It's not a round pearl. It's irregular, okay? But it still fascinated people. And so you took the Baroque pearl and you formed it as the body of the swan and turned it into a fanciful ornament. The pearls, of course, are natural. They're not man-made, with the addition of enameling and gold turning it into a very elegant swan. And there is underneath here, there is another small pearl, and there is a ruby here, and there's another ruby here, and it hangs from a chain, and there's a loop so that you would wear it around the neck, okay? The setting is masterful and shows how valuable these pearls were considered to be. And the pearls at that time generally came from the Persian Gulf because they still were not familiar with the pearls from Tahiti and the South Seas. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is some of the work of Carl Fabergé. Is Carl Fabergé? Yes. His ancestor was Peter Carl Fabergé, who left France in 1685 because he was a Protestant, and the Protestants were being killed there, okay? Eventually, the family, he set up a jewelry business there in Russia, and eventually the family settled in St. Petersburg in 1842, and they had a store in Russia, also had a store in London, by the way. Okay, they had 2 stores. And in 1883, Carl Fabergé suggested to Alexander III that an Easter egg with a surprise would be an appropriate gift for the Tsarina. He thought it was a great idea. So he placed a standing order for a commission for an egg every year to give to his wife. When Nicholas, the last Tsar, came to power, his order was for 2 eggs, one for his mother and one for his wife. There were a total of 57 eggs that were made, but many of them are gone. They're not extant anymore. Now, I'm going to show you, now you know that there was a large collection of Fabergé at the Forbes family in New York. They put it up for auction, I believe, in 2008, and before it could be auctioned off, the Russians came in and bought the whole thing. They are trying to reclaim their patrimony. The stuff that the Bolsheviks gave up for a song and a dance in the 1920s, the Russians are trying to buy it back now. Okay, so let's look at some of these eggs. This one is called the rosebud egg. It's red enamel with gold and diamonds. And the surprise is a yellow rosebud with the replica of the Tsarina's crown inside. Now, I don't know why they don't have the crown in the picture. It may very well be that that part of the surprise is gone, okay? This was given by Nicholas to his wife the year of their marriage. They hastened to marry because his father had been assassinated, and within a week, they were already engaged. They were going to have a very big wedding, but within a week after that, they were married. And this is the first egg that he gave her in 1895. Now, I'm going to show you on the next slide a detail, and you can see the date 1895 is on it, and there is an arrow, the arrows of love, of course. And if you look closely, again, this is not a good reproduction, but the enamel that Fabergé used was a transparent enamel which would reveal the work of the gold underneath, and the gold itself was engraved underneath, and they call it guilloché enamel, all right? And it's a transparent enamel. Now, enameling is a very, very sensitive process because every color needs a different temperature. And if it bakes too long at that temperature, it's ruined. So, in other words, when you do this, in order to get it that perfect, they may have made perhaps 2 others that failed. This is the reason why the standing order was placed, and when the egg was sent to the Tsarina, then the very next day probably, they started working on next year's egg, because again, it took a tremendous amount of time to do this work. And you will see why in a few minutes. In addition to looking at this, and of course the arrows, of course, were the arrows of love, all right? Now here's the coronation egg from 1897. This is the one that he gave, Nicholas gave to the Tsarina. The egg itself is of a transparent lime yellow, lime green, greeny yellow, okay? It sports a diamond at the apex, and these black things here are the double-headed eagle, which is a symbol of Russia. And when you open the egg, this replica of the imperial coach can be removed, and it has its little wheels, and you can push it. It's fully animated, and as you can see, the door even opens of the coach. The door is open as well. And that, of course, is all gold and enamel, and the coach, the door of the coach, and the coachman's box right here are also set with tiny diamonds. Just marvelous. And the workmanship is beyond belief. It truly, truly is. Now, let's look at this one. This is the one he gave his mother in 1897. It is known as the 12 monogram egg. Who owns this? Well, it's in the United States, as a matter of fact. Joseph Davies was named ambassador to Russia in 1930. His wife was Marjorie Merriweather Post, and he took her to Russia, and she purchased a collection of Fabergé in Russia. The Bolsheviks were anxious for money. They opened up the treasure chest to her, and she made her selection. It's called the 12 monogram egg because it refers to each panel has a diamond monogram of previous czars. The surprise, however, is missing. Nicholas gave this to his mother, and today this resides in Washington, D.C. at Hillwood, which is the Post estate. When Marjorie Merriweather Post died, she left the entire estate and its contents to the United States government. So it's one of our basically national museums, all right? But the museum is called Hillwood, and it's the Post estate in Washington, D.C. Now, this next one, which is just so beautiful. It's the Lily of the Valley egg from 1898. It's pink and green enamel, and with the surprise rises from the top with the miniature of the Tsar and their two oldest children. She had, I believe this baby had been born in 1897, so the two oldest children, Olga and Tatiana, you know, they had 4 girls, and then the boy was born, okay? This egg is absolutely superb and unbelievable as to the execution of the precious stones. Now, each of these, the egg, of course, is Lily of the Valley, and so we have the leaves of the Lily of the Valley, which are enameled green. You have the lovely lilac of the egg, and you can see some of that workmanship of the gold underneath. And each of those Lily of the Valley is a little pearl edged around with diamonds. Okay, and look at even a pearl, even a little stand here, even little pearls and diamonds set in the little feet of the stand. So it's, and of course, when you close it, you notice that the Tsar is crowned by a crown. So when you close that, you have a crown at the top of the egg. This is considered one of the most beautiful ever executed. And for most people, it's their favorite, and it is my favorite. I've seen it, and it's just lovely, truly lovely. Now, here is the Gatchina Palace egg. This is most beautiful transparent white enamel. It has an opalescence to it. And there are delicate swags. It's a the motif is very 18th century. It has these very delicate ribbon swags, which hold, each holds baskets with flowers or clusters of musical instruments, each segment delineated with pearls, as you can see, okay? Now, when you open it, the surprise does not come out. The surprise rises up. And what it is a gold reproduction of the Gatchina Palace, which was the residence of Nicholas's mother, Marie. So he gave this to her in 1901. The details of the inside are absolutely amazing because we can see cannons, a flag, and a landscape of trees. This was originally the home of Gregory Orloff, who was the lover of Catherine the Great. Now, one of the master goldsmiths who worked for him, he had 2 master goldsmiths who worked for him, a lot of it. He had a beautiful workshop with many people. But Michael Perkin and Michael Selchikov were 2 of his main people who did this kind of work. The lesser artists would do other things to carve the little animals and whatnot. But this one here was done by Mikhail Perkin, who was a master goldsmith for Fabergé. Now, I'm going to show you 2 more. These are both belong to the Queen of England. She has a collection of more than 400 somehow the number 434 sticks in my mind, and I think I'm right. 434 objects of Fabergé that were collected by her father and her grandmother and her grandfather, and just absolutely marvelous. And she has 2 of the imperial eggs. This one, the basket of flowers egg from 1901. Obviously the surprise is the basket, this beautifully basket with this netting here, this netting of diamonds around it, as you can see. The base is this lovely lapis blue, and of course the date is there inscribed, and with a little handle, and the flowers are all gold and diamonds, and there is even some stalks of wheat in it as well. So it's beautifully done. That belongs to the Queen. And a few years ago, she, at the Queen's Gallery, her entire collection of Fabergé was on display. And I was fortunate enough to be in London at the time, and I saw both of these eggs. And here is the other egg. This one is called the mosaic egg. It's from 1914. And of course, the little surprise shows this lovely oval portrait that comes out of the egg, and has an oval relief of the 5 royal children with Alexei on the right. The oval is outlined with pearls and surmounted by a crown. And this is very poignant because, as you know, within 4 years, all of these people would be dead. Now, if you wish to see 2 of the Fabergé eggs, you can go to the Metropolitan. There is on a loan that's been there for about 4 or 5 years now, the Mildred Gettings collection. She had quite a collection of Fabergé, and when she died, she wanted the collection to be shown to as many people as possible. So the Met has a long-term loan right now with 2 of the eggs there, 2 eggs, and there is at least another 15 or 20 objects of Fabergé, including fans. They would make the frame of the fan, all of diamonds and mother of pearl and whatnot, and then of course the lace was put on the fan, and picture frames and whatnot. So if you want to see some Fabergé, go to the Metropolitan. It's on the, I don't want to lie to you, it's on the first floor, I believe. As you're going toward the Petrie Court, there is there's an elevator. And right opposite the elevator, over there, you will see these glass cases in which is ensconced the work of Peter Carl Fabergé. I want to thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.